Section 11, Fair Housing Act Declaration of Policy. Arizona Fair Housing 101, Understanding the Language of Fair Housing. After several weeks of working through fair housing scenarios, Sarah noticed something. David, she said, every legal question we've discussed seems to come back to the same thing. What's that? He asked. The definitions. David smiled. Exactly. One word can completely change how a fair housing law applies. He picked up a copy of the Fair Housing Act and placed it on the conference table. Most people think definitions are the boring part of the law. In reality, they're often the most important. Sarah looked surprised. Really? David nodded. If two people don't agree on what a word means, they probably won't agree on how the law should be applied. That's why Congress included specific definitions in the Fair Housing Act. They provide the framework for everything we've been discussing throughout this course. The purpose of the Fair Housing Act. David opened the statute and pointed to its declaration of policy. The Fair Housing Act begins with a simple but powerful statement. The policy of the United States is to provide fair housing throughout the nation within the limits established by the Constitution. He looked at Sarah. Everything else in the Act builds on that single principle. The goal isn't simply to punish discrimination. The goal is to create equal housing opportunities for everyone. Sarah nodded. That makes the rest of the law easier to understand. It does. When you understand the purpose, the definitions start making sense. What is considered a dwelling? Sarah pointed to the next definition. It says dwelling. Does that just mean a house? Not at all, David replied. Under the Fair Housing Act, a dwelling generally includes a building, structure, or portion of a building that is occupied or intended to be occupied as a residence. It may also include vacant land offered for the construction of residential housing. In other words, David explained, fair housing isn't limited to single-family homes. It can apply to condominiums, townhomes, apartments, manufactured homes, duplexes, and many other types of residential property. As agents, we work with dwellings every day. A family may be one person, Sarah laughed. I noticed something else. It says a family can be one individual. David smiled. Exactly. Many people think the word family automatically means parents and children. But under the Fair Housing Act, one person living alone can still be considered a family for purposes of the law. That's another reminder not to make assumptions. Who is considered a person? The law also defines the word person much more broadly than most people realize. Fair housing protections and responsibilities apply not only to individuals, but also to corporations, partnerships, associations, trusts, property management companies, homeowner associations, real estate brokerages, lenders, builders, and many other legal entities involved in housing transactions. So when we talk about fair housing compliance, David explained, it's not just individual agents who have responsibilities. Entire organizations do as well. What does it mean to rent? Sarah smiled. I think everyone knows what renting means. David laughed. You'd be surprised. Under the Fair Housing Act, renting includes leasing, subleasing, or otherwise granting another person the right to occupy residential property in exchange for consideration. The law focuses on the housing transaction itself, not simply the label we place on it. Sarah recognized another familiar term. We've already spent quite a bit of time discussing disabilities. We have, David replied. The Fair Housing Act protects individuals who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. It also protects individuals who have a record of such an impairment or who are regarded as having such an impairment. David reminded Sarah that the law requires every situation to be evaluated individually. Never assume someone has or does not have a disability. And never make housing decisions based upon assumptions. Who can file a fair housing complaint? Sarah continued reading. It mentions an aggrieved person. David nodded. That's simply someone who believes they've been harmed or are about to be harmed by an unlawful housing practice. That individual may file a fair housing complaint for investigation. The important point, David explained, is that someone doesn't have to wait until the damage is complete before seeking protection. Familial status. Sarah recognized another familiar phrase. We've talked about this one before. We have, David replied. Familial status protects households that include children under the age of 18. It also protects pregnant women and individuals in the process of obtaining legal custody of a child. Those protections help ensure families have equal access to housing. What is conciliation? Sarah pointed to another definition. It says conciliation. That sounds complicated. It's actually one of the simplest concepts in the law. David explained that conciliation is an attempt to resolve a fair housing complaint through discussion and negotiation before the dispute continues through additional legal proceedings. Think of it as an opportunity to solve the problem before everyone spends years fighting about it. If an agreement is reached, the parties may enter into a written conciliation agreement that outlines how the dispute will be resolved. In many situations, David said, everyone benefits when problems can be resolved professionally and fairly. Why these definitions matter. Sarah closed the book. I'll admit, I thought this chapter was going to be nothing but legal definitions. David smiled. So did most students. But every fair housing conversation we've had in this course depends on these definitions. If we don't understand the language of the law, we can't properly apply the law. Sarah nodded. I guess the definitions aren't boring after all. They're actually the foundation. David laughed. Now you're thinking like a broker. You don't have to memorize every definition in the Fair Housing Act. Instead, understand the purpose behind the language and recognize when a situation may involve fair housing. When questions arise, consult your designated broker, legal counsel, or current HUD guidance before making decisions that could affect a client's housing rights. Online discussion. Question 1. Why are legal definitions important when applying fair housing laws? Answer. Legal definitions establish how the law applies in specific situations. Understanding those definitions helps real estate professionals correctly identify when fair housing protections may apply and avoid making incorrect assumptions. Question 2. Why does the Fair Housing Act define terms such as dwelling, person, and family more broadly than many people expect? Answer. Congress intentionally adopted broad definitions so that fair housing protections would apply to many different housing situations, organizations, and individuals involved in residential real estate transactions. Question 3. How can understanding the purpose of the Fair Housing Act help licensees make better decisions? Answer. When licensees understand that the law is designed to provide equal housing opportunities, they are more likely to apply the law consistently, treat consumers fairly, and recognize potential fair housing issues before they become violations.